May 17, 1946. Federal Courthouse, Portland, Oregon. Court stenographer Loretta Pembroke was typing her 215th page of the day when the chief clerk placed a folder on her desk. An ordinary manila folder with worn corners and faded stamps. "Retype this from scratch," he said without emotion. "Original's falling apart." Loretta nodded without looking up from her keys. She didn't know that in 2 weeks she'd close the door to this office for the last time, and in a month she'd be sitting on a train to Seattle with a one-way ticket purchased with her last dollars. And that the worst part wouldn't be what she'd learn, but what she'd have to do about it. To understand what broke that May afternoon, you need to know who Loretta Pembroke was. She was 28 years old, born in 1918 in Portland to a customs agent and an elementary school teacher. An ordinary American biography, though not without scars. Public school, secretarial college, work at the county clerk's office, then transfer to federal court. Unmarried. Not by choice, but by circumstance. The war had claimed the men of her generation before they could become husbands. Loretta lived with her mother in a 2-bedroom apartment on Morrison Street, wore neat cotton dresses, went to the pictures on Saturdays, and baked pies on Sundays. A quiet life built on top of buried grief. The grief had a name. Walter Pembroke, Loretta's father. He died in 1943. Not in combat, not from illness. He'd been arrested in March 1942, 2 months after Pearl Harbor, accused of passing customs information to Japanese agents. Tried, convicted, sentenced to 20 years, sent to a federal penitentiary in California. He died there 18 months later. Heart failure, the official report said. He was 49 years old. Loretta's mother never recovered. She'd believed in her husband's innocence until her dying breath, but belief doesn't overturn convictions. And in 1942, during the panic after Pearl Harbor, innocence was a luxury few could afford to prove. Loretta had been 24 when they arrested her father, old enough to understand. Old enough to see the neighborhood turn against them. Old enough to lose her job at the county office because the daughter of a traitor couldn't be trusted with government work. It took her 2 years to find employment again. The federal courthouse hired her in 1944, desperate for stenographers with the war draining civilian staff. They needed her skills more than they cared about her father's record. So Loretta typed, and typed, and tried not to think about the fact that somewhere in these filing cabinets was her father's case file. That somewhere in this building, someone had typed the words that sent Walter Pembroke to prison to die. But there was one thing that distinguished her from dozens of other stenographers. Loretta possessed absolute mechanical memory for documents. She didn't just type papers, she absorbed them. A page read once settled permanently in her consciousness like a photograph. Names, dates, charges, legal statutes, all of it organized itself into a system in her mind. She could remember a month later that in the Kendrick case the indictment was filed on August 3rd, and the verdict came on August 6th, just 3 days, though normally it took at least 2 weeks. She noticed discrepancies, repetitions, anomalies. But Loretta had long ago learned the primary rule of survival. Notice, but don't speak. The workday at the courthouse started at 8 in the morning. Loretta arrived 15 minutes early, hung her light spring coat in the cloakroom, climbed to the 3rd-floor typing pool, and sat at her desk by the window. Her Underwood typewriter, heavy and black with stiff keys, sat before her like a workbench before a carpenter. Stack of clean paper on the left, carbon paper, blotter, and files. Endless files. In 1946, a particular stream of documents flowed through the federal courthouse. After the war's end, investigations were being reviewed. Thousands of people investigated between 1942 and 1945. Suspected enemy sympathizers, suspected spies, suspected saboteurs were now having their cases reconsidered. Some were being cleared. Compensation claims were being filed. Loretta typed them every day. Name, charge, outcome, case closed, stamp, signature, next. She never looked for her father's file. She didn't want to know what fabrications they'd used to convict him. Some truths hurt more than ignorance. May 17th was an ordinary warm day. Through the open window drifted the scent of roses and dust. 4 other stenographers worked in the pool. Dorothy, Vivian, and young Maureen, who'd arrived just a month ago and constantly fumbled with the carbon paper. They typed. The monotonous clacking of keys merged into a steady hum. At 11 o'clock, the chief clerk walked in. Rutherford P. Caldwell. He was pushing 60, thin, stooped, with the yellow face of a chain smoker and eyes that looked past people, not at them. He'd worked at the courthouse for 30 years and had seen everything. That's precisely why he preferred to see nothing. He approached Loretta's desk and placed a folder before her. Quote 2, quote, he said. Quote 3, quote. Loretta looked at the folder. It was genuinely old. Worn cardboard, frayed corners, faded ink on the cover. Case number 4458/42. Year 42. 4 years ago. Right after Pearl Harbor. The same time they'd arrested her father. Yes, Mr. Caldwell. Caldwell nodded and left without looking back. Loretta opened the folder. Case of Dalton Hartwell Ashcroft, born 1897, resident of Gresham, Oregon. Charges: espionage, conspiracy to commit sabotage, unauthorized communication with enemy agents. Federal Statutes 18 U.S.C. Section 794, Section 2153, Section 2154. Sentence: execution. Carried out November 4th, 1942. A standard case from that time. Loretta had seen hundreds like it, just like her father's. She extracted the fragile yellowed sheets from the folder. The paper was so brittle it crumbled at the edges. It genuinely needed retyping, or the document would simply disintegrate. Loretta fed a clean sheet into her machine, inserted carbon paper, and began typing. Interrogation transcript dated August 12, 1942. She typed slowly, carefully, transferring the text word for word. Ashcroft had confessed during questioning that he'd transmitted information about West Coast shipping schedules to Japanese intelligence through an intermediary whose name he wouldn't reveal. Standard formulations. Loretta typed without thinking. How many times had she read similar confessions? How many people had signed their names to accusations they probably didn't commit? By lunch, she'd retyped 23 pages. Interrogation transcripts, confrontations, the indictment. Everything fit the familiar pattern. A man was arrested, questioned, he confessed, he was executed. One of thousands of stories from the war years. Loretta went to the cafeteria on the first floor for her lunch break, returned 40 minutes later, sat at her typewriter, picked up the next sheet from the folder, and froze. It was a transcript of the same interrogation, from August 12, 1942, Dalton Hartwell Ashcroft. But the text was different. Loretta reread it 3 times. No, she hadn't made a mistake. In the version she'd just retyped, Ashcroft confessed to espionage for Japan. In this new sheet, he confessed to embezzlement of government property and theft of rationed goods on a massive scale. Different crimes, different statutes, but the same date, the same investigator, the same defendant. Loretta slowly raised her eyes. The typing pool was empty. Dorothy and Vivian had gone to the file room. Maureen had stepped out somewhere. Quiet. Only the buzzing of flies and the rose-scented sunshine through the window. Loretta returned to the folder and began sorting through the pages. There were 2 complete sets of documents in the file. One, old, yellowed with water stains, which she'd started retyping. The espionage case. 2, slightly less worn but also clearly not new. The embezzlement case. Same defendant name, Dalton Hartwell Ashcroft. Same arrest date, August 3, 1942. Same interrogation dates. Same investigator, Special Agent Vernon T. Blackwell. Same sentence. Execution. Same date carried out, November 4, 1942. but completely different charges. In one version, Ashcroft was a dangerous enemy agent, a spy, a saboteur. In the other, a thief and embezzler. Loretta sat motionless, staring at the two sets of papers. Her first thought was simple: a mistake. Someone confused files, misfiled documents, made an error. 4 years in storage, papers deteriorate. Someone at some point could have made a mistake. But something inside whispered, no. The files were too carefully assembled. Each had its own transcripts, its own testimony, its own signatures. This wasn't a mechanical filing error. This was something else. Loretta took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly. She recognized that investigator's name, Vernon T. Blackwell, the same agent who had investigated her father. She felt ice spread through her chest. Loretta looked at the clock. 3 in the afternoon, 2 hours until end of business. Caldwell wanted the file retyped by closing. Which one exactly? That was the question. She opened the folder again, looked for a cover memo. There wasn't one. Just 2 sets of documents and no explanation about which to type. But now she understood something she hadn't before. This wasn't random. Loretta stood, walked into the corridor, reached Caldwell's office, knocked. "Come in." She entered. Caldwell sat at his desk, sorting through papers. "Mr. Caldwell, about the Ashcroft case, there are 2 versions of the indictment. Which should I retype?" Caldwell raised his eyes, looked at her with a long, heavy gaze. 1 second. 2. 3. "Whichever's on top," he said evenly. "They're intermixed." "Miss Pembroke," Caldwell placed his pen on the desk. His voice dropped lower. "Retype the one on fresher paper. Understood?" She understood. Fresher paper. That was the embezzlement case, meaning they were removing the old espionage case, replacing it with a new one. Or rather, with an old one, but different. "Understood, Mr. Caldwell." "Good. Get back to work." Loretta returned to the typing pool, sat at her typewriter, set aside the espionage sheets, took the embezzlement sheets, fed in clean paper. But before she started typing, she did something she'd never done before. She took the espionage sheets, the ones she was supposed to discard, and made 1 extra carbon copy of the entire file. It took her 20 minutes, typing quickly while the office was still empty. She worked with shaking hands, glancing at the door every few seconds. When she finished, she had 2 copies, the official one she was creating for the file, and a secret one for herself. She slipped the secret copy into her purse. Then she began typing the official version. Dalton Hartwell Ashcroft confessed that from 1940 to 1942, he systematically stole rationed goods using his position as warehouse supervisor at the Portland Army Supply Depot. Organized a theft ring of 5 people, sold goods on the black market, kept the money, caused damage to government property totaling $14,000. Loretta typed. Her fingers moved automatically, but one thought hammered in her head. Why? Why change charges from espionage to embezzlement? The sentence remained the same. Execution. Ashcroft was killed either way. What difference did it make now, 4 years later, what exactly he was charged with? Unless compensation. After the war ended, they'd begun reviewing cases of suspected enemy agents. People charged under wartime espionage laws, those arrested in the panic after Pearl Harbor. Many were being cleared, found to have been wrongly suspected. Their families were receiving government compensation, letters of apology, sometimes money, but common criminals weren't being compensated. A thief, an embezzler, a murderer, those types weren't cleared. Their cases weren't reviewed. They remained criminals. So if Ashcroft was a spy, he might be posthumously cleared. If a thief? No. Someone in 1946 was rewriting the case, turning a political prisoner into a criminal. So compensation wouldn't apply to this person. So he'd remain an enemy. But why? Ashcroft was executed 4 years ago. He's gone. What difference does compensation make? Unless there was family, a widow, children, pressing for compensation, for clearing his name, and someone didn't want that name cleared. Loretta continued typing mechanically while her mind raced. The espionage confession was detailed, but as she'd read it, she'd noticed something. The language was too perfect, the details too precise, just like her father's confession had been, according to her mother's description. Too thorough. Loretta had typed hundreds of confessions. She knew what genuine ones looked like. They were messy, contradictory. People forgot dates, confused numbers, changed details. These confessions, both Ashcroft's and her father's, had been perfect. Every date precise, every amount exact, every name spelled correctly. Like someone had written them from records, not from memory. Like someone had fabricated them. And that someone was Special Agent Vernon T. Blackwell. By 5 o'clock she'd finished, 42 pages, a complete new case file. She gathered the fresh pages, put them in order, stacked them neatly, placed them in a clean folder, took it to Caldwell's office. He was preparing to leave, putting on his coat. "Finished, Mr. Caldwell." "Good." He took the folder, didn't open it. She turned to leave. She stopped. It was a lie. But he nodded, satisfied. __quote _19 ______. Loretta returned to the typing pool, grabbed her purse with the hidden copy inside. Then she left the courthouse. That evening, Loretta sat in her apartment, the stolen pages spread on her kitchen table. Her mother had gone to bed early. The apartment was quiet. Loretta read through everything again carefully. The espionage case against Ashcroft had been genuine, real investigation, real evidence, or at least, evidence that appeared real. He'd been arrested, tried, and executed as a suspected spy. Now, 4 years later, someone was replacing it with a fabricated embezzlement case, and the same agent, Blackwell, had handled both Ashcroft and her father. Loretta stood, went to her bedroom closet. From the back, behind her winter coats, she pulled out a small wooden box. Her mother didn't know she had it. Inside were papers, documents she'd quietly copied over the past 2 years. Her father's case file. She'd found it in the archives one day, couldn't help herself, and made a copy when no one was looking. She spread those pages beside Ashcroft's. Walter Pembroke, arrested March 1942. Accused of passing customs information to enemy agents. Confession detailed and perfect. Investigated by Special Agent Vernon T. Blackwell. Convicted. Sentenced to 20 years. Died in prison 1943. The confession style matched Ashcroft's exactly. The same perfect precision. The same flawless detail. Both fabricated. Loretta sat down heavily. Her father had been innocent, just like she'd always believed. Just like her mother had insisted until she died of a broken heart 6 months ago. And now Loretta held proof. But what could she do with it? She spent a sleepless night staring at the documents. By dawn, she'd made a decision. She would find out more. She would discover how many cases Blackwell had fabricated. She would gather evidence. And then she would decide. The next morning, Saturday, Loretta didn't go to the pictures. Instead, she went to the public library. She spent 6 hours searching through old newspapers, reading about wartime arrests, looking for mentions of Dalton Ashcroft and other cases investigated by Blackwell. She found patterns. Dozens of arrests in 1942 to 1943, most handled by Blackwell. Most resulted in convictions, all with remarkably similar confessions. Loretta made lists, copied names, built a timeline. By evening, she had identified at least 15 suspicious cases. 15 people convicted, some executed, some imprisoned, based on questionable evidence, including her father. On Monday, she returned to work, typed her usual pages, said nothing to anyone. But during lunch break, she went to the basement archives, found the records clerk. The clerk, a middle-aged man named Walter, looked at her curiously. He shrugged, pulled a ledger, ran his finger down columns. Quote, 23. He copied it onto a slip of paper, handed it to her. Loretta took it. An address in Northeast Portland, not far from her own apartment. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 24, underscore, underscore. That evening, after work, Loretta stood outside a small house on 47th Avenue, a narrow two-story with peeling paint and an unkempt yard. She walked up the front steps, knocked. A woman answered, young, perhaps 30, thin face, tired eyes. Loretta saw herself in that exhaustion. Constance's face hardened. My father was executed. What more information could there possibly be? May I come in? Please. It's important. It's about the truth. Something in Loretta's voice made Constance pause. She stepped aside. The interior was sparse, worn furniture, a small radio, photographs on the mantel. Loretta saw a picture of a man in work clothes, Ashcroft, presumably. They sat in the living room. Loretta explained carefully. She told Constance about the 2 case files, about the replacement, about the changed charges, about Special Agent Blackwell. And then, her voice breaking, she told Constance about her own father, about the similarities, about her suspicion that Blackwell had fabricated dozens of cases. Constance listened without expression. When Loretta finished, she was silent for a long moment. Constance stood, walked to the window, looked out at the darkening street, Loretta admitted. Constance turned. Her face was bitter. Constance's voice rose. It doesn't bring him back. It doesn't undo 4 years of hell. And if we tried to fight this, if we accused a federal agent of fabricating evidence, they'd destroy us, just like they destroyed our fathers. But the truth doesn't pay rent, Miss Pembroke. The truth doesn't put food on the table. The truth is a luxury I can't afford. Loretta felt her hope crumbling. So you won't help? I can't help. I'm barely surviving as it is. I'm sorry about your father. I'm sorry about mine. But I have to think about my own survival now. Loretta stood, walked to the door. I understand. As she stepped outside, Constance called after her. Miss Pembroke, be careful. If they fabricated evidence once, they'll do worse to protect themselves. Loretta walked home slowly. The evening was cool. Portland's streets were quiet. She'd expected, what? Gratitude? Alliance? Hope? Instead, she'd found fear and resignation. But Constance was right about one thing. This was dangerous. The next morning, Loretta woke to pounding on her door. She stumbled out of bed, confused. Her mother was already at the door. Quote 48. Quote 49. Loretta's blood went cold. She ran to her bedroom, grabbed the documents, both Ashcroft's espionage file and her father's copied case, and shoved them into the kitchen stove. Loretta, they're demanding entry, her mother called. Coming! Loretta struck a match, lit the papers, watched them catch fire. 42 pages of Ashcroft's truth, 37 pages of her father's innocence, all turning to ash. By the time she opened the door, the evidence was gone. 2 men in suits stood there, FBI badges. Loretta Pembroke? Yes. We need to speak with you. Now. They searched the apartment, thoroughly, pulled out drawers, checked under mattresses, opened closets. What are you looking for? Her mother demanded. Missing federal documents, one agent said curtly. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find anymore. After an hour, they left, but not before one agent leaned close to Loretta. We know you took files from the courthouse. We know you've been asking questions. Stop. Now. Or you'll regret it. It wasn't a warning. It was a threat. After they left, Loretta sat on her sofa, shaking. Her mother sat beside her, pale. And it was true. The evidence was gone, burned to ash. Nothing remained but her memory. And memory couldn't prove anything. The next day, Caldwell called her to his office. "Miss Pembroke, have a seat." She sat. "There's been a complaint," he said carefully, "about your conduct. Unauthorized access to files, asking questions beyond your duties, creating disturbances." Loretta said nothing. Normally, such behavior would result in immediate termination and possible criminal charges. However, he paused, the matter could be resolved quietly. "How?" "You resign. Today. Quietly. No questions asked. No investigation pursued. You find other employment, away from government work. And you never speak about anything you may have learned during your employment here." He looked at her directly. "Do you understand the alternative?" She understood. Resign or face prosecution. Silence or destruction. "I understand," she whispered. "Good." Caldwell pulled out a resignation form, already filled out. "Sign here." Loretta took the pen, signed her name with a hand that no longer trembled. She was beyond trembling now. "You're dismissed. Collect your personal items and leave today." Loretta returned to the typing pool. The other stenographers watched curiously but said nothing. They knew. Everyone always knew. She gathered her few belongings, a coffee cup, a small plant, a photograph of her parents together taken before the war, before everything broke. She walked out of the courthouse at noon, into bright May sunshine, unemployed, blacklisted from government work, carrying secrets with no proof, but alive, for now. She walked through downtown Portland, people everywhere, shopping, working, living their lives, none of them knowing what she knew, none of them caring. Loretta thought about her father, about Ashcroft, about the dozen others Blackwell had destroyed, and about Blackwell himself. Where was he now? Still working? Still fabricating cases? Still sleeping peacefully at night? She found out a week later, through a newspaper article about FBI personnel changes. Special Agent Vernon T. Blackwell, retired 1945, decorated for wartime service, currently serving as a consultant on federal security matters, living in West Hills, respected, honored, rewarded. While his victims rotted in graves or lived in shame, Loretta found work eventually. As a secretary at a shipping company. Lower pay than the courthouse. Boring work. Typing invoices and bills of lading. But safe work. No secrets. No lies. No midnight raids. She settled into a routine. Work. Home. Library on weekends. Movies occasionally. Months passed. A year. The city moved forward. But Loretta couldn't forget. Late at night, she'd remember the documents burning, the truth turning to ash, her father's innocence destroyed twice, once by Blackwell's fabrication, once by her own hand. In 1947, Congress held hearings on wartime injustices. Some families received settlements, some cases were reviewed. Loretta read about it in newspapers, felt sick. But she said nothing, because she had no proof, because they'd threatened her, because she wanted to survive. Years passed. Her mother died in 1952. Loretta inherited the apartment, lived alone. She never married, never had children, lived quietly. In 1958, she read Vernon Blackwell's obituary, died at age 70, survived by wife, 2 children, 5 grandchildren, remembered as a dedicated public servant who helped protect America during dangerous times. No mention of the people he'd falsely convicted. No mention of the lives he'd destroyed. Loretta clipped the obituary, put it in a drawer, next to her resignation form. Documents of a truth that would never be told. She worked at the shipping company for 30 years, retired in 1976. Gold watch, small pension. She lived simply, read books, watched television. Thought about that May week in 1946 when she discovered 2 case files and learned what she shouldn't have known. In the 1980s, when historical archives began opening, when scholars started documenting wartime injustices, Loretta read their work. She saw some familiar names, cases she'd typed, people she'd known about. But not Ashcroft. His fabricated criminal record protected him from historical examination. The lie had worked perfectly. And not her father, because his case remained sealed in some archive, his innocence forever buried under Blackwell's fabrication. Loretta wondered sometimes if she should contact a historian, tell them what she'd known, what she'd destroyed. But what could she prove? 40 years had passed. Everyone involved was dead. Records were scattered or destroyed. And even if she could prove it, what would change? You can't undo history, can't bring back the dead, can't erase suffering. All you can do is acknowledge it. And sometimes, even acknowledgement brings more pain than peace. Loretta made her choice long ago, to burn the evidence, to choose survival over truth, to live with silence rather than die with dignity. Some might call that cowardice. Others might call it wisdom. The instinct of someone who'd watched her father destroyed by principles and learned that sometimes survival requires compromise. The truth isn't always freedom. Sometimes it's just another way to die. Loretta lived into the 1990s, watched the Cold War end, watched the Soviet Union collapse, watched old secrets surface. But hers stayed buried. She died in 1994 at age 76, alone in her apartment on Morrison Street. The same apartment where she'd lived since before the war, since before everything changed. They found her 3 days later. A neighbor noticed newspapers piling up. She was buried at Willamette National Cemetery. Small headstone, name and dates, nothing more. No one knew her story. No one wrote about her. No one made documentaries. She was just a stenographer who typed 200 pages a day. But once, in May 1946, she held truth in her hands and chose to burn it. Why? Because truth without proof is just a target on your back. Because silence is survival. Because she'd learned from her father's death that principles don't protect you from powerful men with badges. Loretta made her choice. To live with lies, but to live. Rather than die with truth that no one would believe anyway. It was her choice. Whether right or wrong, that's not for us to judge. The Ashcroft case remained in the archives as an embezzlement case. No one ever reviewed it again. Dalton Hartwell Ashcroft, thief and embezzler. So it's recorded. Walter Pembroke's case remained in the archives as espionage, traitor and spy. So it's recorded. And somewhere in the ash of an old stove on Morrison Street lies what's left of the truth. 79 pages turned to carbon. A daughter's proof of her father's innocence. Another man's evidence of false conviction. All sacrificed to the god of self-preservation. That truth no longer matters to anyone, because everyone it concerned is long dead, and to the living, it would have brought only danger. Thus ended the story of Loretta Pembroke, court stenographer, who once held her father's vindication in her hands and chose to burn it rather than die defending it. She chose survival. She chose silence. She chose life over justice. And every night until her death, she wondered if her father would have understood. Or if, from whatever place the dead watched the living, he saw her destroy his innocence and turned away in disgust. She never knew. And that unknowing was its own punishment. A sentence she served for 48 years, longer than her father's imprisonment, more painful than his death. Some prisons have bars. Others have only memory and the ash of burned truth. Loretta lived in both until the day she died,